Hey, and welcome to Bad Movie Takes. I don't know if you've heard, but Avatar has been signed on for 4 sequels, and I've got some issues with that. Avatar was a giant blockbuster directed by James Cameron and released in 2009. It actually still holds the title as the highest grossing movie of all time, with Avengers Endgame right behind it. It cost between $280 and $310 million, and they spent an additional $150 million just for promotion of this thing. So many people saw it, but here's the problem. On paper, it's such a popular movie. Clearly everyone has seen it, and it did so well in theaters, and now there's 4 sequels coming. It must be great. But, honestly, do you ever hear anyone talk about it? And further than that, do you even remember it? I mean, I saw it in theaters, and I honestly couldn't tell you a thing about it. Now, one thing I do remember, though, is while I was watching it, I kept thinking about how familiar it felt, and it bugged me forever until I realized it's Fern Gully. And I'm not the only one who felt that. There's actually a lot of talk online about all the movies that it ripped off, including Pocahontas, Dances with Wolves, and Fern Gully. James has even been in legal battles about it, but, I'm sure it's an original movie. And I'm not knocking James Cameron. He's an incredible director who's made some very memorable movies like Aliens, Terminator, True Lies, but how come his highest grossing movie just doesn't seem to be in culture or memory at all? And why the heck is it getting 4 sequels? And what's even funnier is James seems to really like this movie. I mean, he wanted to make it for release in 1999, but he didn't think the tech was visionary enough for what he had in mind. It might have been because it was only 7 years after Fern Gully, but we're not talking about that. Now, I'm not going to spend this video ranting about Avatar and all its sequels. I'm actually going to talk about 10 movies that should have a sequel way before Avatar. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list because there are obviously tons of movies that deserve sequels. These are just 10 movies that I feel that I need to see a sequel of. So without further ado, let's get into this. The first movie is Inside Man. It's a 2006 heist film that's a lot more than that, and it stars Clive Owen, who plays Dalton Russell as the criminal mastermind behind this heist. Russell and his team walk into a bank in New York and immediately start taking hostages. They make everyone change into the exact same outfit, and while this is going on, NYPD shows up, including Detective Keith Fraser, played by Denzel Washington, who's the hostage negotiator. As this is going on, Arthur Case, who's the owner of the bank, hires a power broker to kind of keep an eye on things and keep things under control. Meanwhile, inside the bank, there's a lot going on. The hostages are being shuffled between rooms and kind of changed out who's where, and one even gets executed, which of course causes the police to just storm the bank. And that's where things get weird. When the police enter the bank, they realize that all the weapons are fake, no one's been executed, and on top of that, nothing's been stolen. Further, they can't figure out who's a hostage and who's a hostage taker, so they interview everyone and let them all go. We find out that the robbers were actually only after one safety deposit box, a box that doesn't exist on any bank records. They take that, then also build this fake room where Russell's gonna chill for a week until he can safely walk out of the front of the door. We find out that the safety deposit box is owned by Arthur Case and has a lot of incriminating evidence tying him to the Nazis and that he's started the whole bank based off of Nazi blood money. So this entire robbery was staged to bring that information to light. This movie was slick with a whole bunch of twists and a lot of moving parts, and it left me wondering a lot of things like who was Russell and his crew, who hired him, and this clearly wasn't their first gig because of how smooth everything worked. And since they are so well coordinated, meaning they've done this before, what else have they done? And I just need to see that in a sequel. Spike Lee wanted to make a sequel, but there was just no appetite for it, which is really weird because it made $184 million off of a $45 million budget. Plus it had a lot of huge stars in it, so I'm really confused. I mean, yes, there was a sequel made, but it's a direct-to-DVD thing. It didn't involve any of the cast. Spike Lee wasn't put in it, so I want to see a real sequel with Spike Lee's vision of where this was going to go. Next we have Serenity, and Serenity is kind of a sequel to an extremely disrespected show called Firefly, but I just need to know. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Firefly, first, I'm sorry, and second, it was a short-lived space cowboy show aired on Fox. Now, Fox only showed 11 out of 14 of the episodes, but they showed them completely out of order so the audience couldn't follow it. Worse still, they ended it on a cliffhanger that left fans wanting more. Now, the story behind Firefly and Serenity is it follows a crew that fought on the losing side of a battle of independence against the Alliance. Now the crew makes its way by smuggling goods and whatever they can, while also kind of avoiding the Alliance in their patrols. Now, Serenity held up pretty well against the show, and it gave fans kind of the closure that they needed. It follows the crew doing its smuggling thing, except this cargo's a little different. The cargo is a psychic human girl, and she leads the crew to discover this planet that's been hidden by the Alliance. And on the planet, they discover this experiment that was done on behavior modification. Essentially, the Alliance was working on a drug that made people more compliant and, I guess, obedient. The unfortunate thing is the drug worked too well and made people just give up. They literally felt like doing nothing, and they just kind of sat and were happy and died. And if that wasn't a big enough problem, there's another part of the population that had the opposite effect of this drug, and they became these feral rage monsters known as Reavers. Of course, this is pretty damning information, and the crew thinks that they finally have the information they need that can maybe start taking down the Alliance and show that it's as evil as they think it is. Naturally, the Alliance doesn't want this, and they send an assassin after the crew, and this assassin is just awesome. He's honestly one of the best bad guys I've ever seen in a movie. The problem is he knows what he is doing is bad, and he accepts it because he believes in a greater good, so he'll take the damage to his soul to help out the cause. Weird fanatic, and does it just so well. Of course the crew wins. They beat the assassin, they broadcast the message, everyone starts to realize the Alliance is not as rosy as it seems, but it doesn't take down the Alliance. It still exists, and there's a lot of work to be done. And I just need to know what happens next. And I think there's a lot of fans that would agree with me there. Next we have The Nice Guys, and this is an incredible buddy cop comedy that just flopped at the box office, and I really don't know why. It's no surprise that it's such a good buddy cop movie because it's directed by Shane Black, the guy who basically created the whole thing with the Lethal Weapon series. The movie follows two private investigators who have two different ways of handling things, who end up on the same case, begrudgingly. Ryan Gosling plays Holland, an alcoholic single father who's also a PI, and he's hired to investigate the disappearance of a porn star. Russell Crowe plays a PI/enforcer named Jackson, who gets hired to stop Holland from poking around too deep. When Jackson's employer turns up dead, as well as the porn star, the two of them decide that maybe they should start looking into things together. First, they gotta kinda, work out some issues between the two of them. Their investigation leads them into the discovery of an experimental porn/public service announcement about the corruption of the auto industry. I will not be reviewing that movie here. As you can imagine, the dynamic between these two characters and the whole investigation and premise itself leads them down an incredibly absurd and hilarious path. This movie is absurd, it's really well done and quite funny, and I have no idea why it bombed so hard in the box office, which is too bad because this could have been a hilarious franchise that just expanded into just whatever it wanted, and I would have been there for it.
You're in the pool?
Yeah.
Why?
I had to question the mermaids.
Since we're on the topic of buddy cop movies, let's talk about one that's a little different. War on Everyone is a buddy cop movie. I mean, they're cops and they're buddies, but buddy cop movies usually follow a pattern of cops trying to do the right thing but breaking all the rules. These guys aren't trying to do the right thing. They just break the rules and are corrupt and perfectly open about it. It follows two corrupt cops in New Mexico, played by Alexander Skarsgård and Michael Pena, and they do such a good job you can't help but love them. They spend their days blackmailing, extorting, and robbing any criminal they can, and no, this isn't like a Robin Hood situation, they just want the money. While they're up to their usual tricks, they discover that a local criminal is planning a heist, and they didn't tell them about it. So naturally, they want a cut. This sends us down an incredibly comical journey about this heist planned by a connected businessman who's also knighted, and they also discover a child porn ring, because why not? And even though they are cops, they don't react to crimes at all as they should, and that's what makes it so good. It's such a satire on police that it just never makes you forget that you're actually just watching bad guys. The dynamic of this duo is hard, violent, and hilarious, and you can tell that these two actors had a great time playing their characters. It was primarily shown in Ireland and the UK and had a limited release in the US, but it never really gained traction there, which is too bad. I've seen it twice and it's absolutely hilarious, and I would die to see what a sequel would bring. If you followed my channel either here or on TikTok for any amount of time, you'll know that I absolutely love low-budget horror movies. What you might not know is that this is one of the movies that sparked my love affair. Big Legend is a 2018 monster horror film that is directed by Justin Lin and also taught me that there's a subgenre of Bigfoot monster films. I love this movie so much and I will always try and find a way to talk about it, so here we are. The movie follows Tyler Laird and his girlfriend Natalie as they embark upon a picturesque hike in the Pacific Northwest. Of course, it's not just a hike, as Tyler proposes to Natalie and she says yes. Things are just great. Later on, you see Tyler setting up camp and you can tell that he's ex-military and also extremely prepared. But in the middle of the night, they're woken up by some very deliberate knocking in the woods, something you do not want to hear when you're sleeping in a tent. The knocking continues and it lures Tyler out to investigate it. Of course, as he's looking for the source of the sound, Natalie is attacked in the tent and dragged into the woods, never to be seen again. We fast forward in the movie to 12 months later when Tyler is being discharged from a psychiatric ward. He's picked up by his mom, who gives him some effects from the police evidence, including his camera. As he's going through the pictures on his camera, he notices this large figure in the backdrop of one of his photos and decides to investigate further. So he packs a pack, grabs a rifle, and goes off into the woods to investigate. He starts seeing these signs around saying that the area is owned by Xylon Industries and that you're not supposed to enter. Throughout his trekking, his pack gets stolen and the truck that he ends up having to sleep in ends up getting completely trashed. He encounters an old hunter named Eli who talks about the area and also talks about an old Chinook legend about a big monster. He also tells Tyler that although there's a bunch of signs for Xylon Incorporated, he's never seen any employees in the area. Their camp is attacked by something huge and a giant tree is uprooted and left in the middle of their fire pit. They go off hunting this thing, which turns into a massive encounter, and Eli is left with a broken leg. Eli and Tyler end up getting separated and Tyler continues the hunt. This progresses into a final confrontation between Tyler and this giant Bigfoot, which is very Predator-like, and it's actually quite entertaining, especially for a low-budget flick. Tyler wins the fight, but is pretty injured, so he ends up waking up in a hospital where he's met by a mysterious man named Jackson Wells, who believes his Bigfoot story and says that he's seen monsters himself. The movie ends with Jackson talking about how he's recruiting for a team that he's set up, and it goes to credits. This movie is clearly a setup for a monster hunting franchise, and the credits even talk about Jackson and Tyler returning in the Monster Chronicles. Unfortunately, this movie just never really took off and didn't get the traction it needed to form this franchise. The director, Justin Lee, has even talked about the franchise, saying that he wanted to do this entire thing involving known monsters and not so known monsters, and I gotta say, there's not enough legit monster movies out there, and I would just die to see this franchise take off. I can almost guarantee that you didn't know that John Travolta and Jonathan Rhys-Meyers were in a movie together. But to be honest, I didn't know until recently, and seeing this movie has changed my life. Not really, but it was a good movie. Jonathan plays James Reese, a personal aide to the US ambassador in France. He lives in Paris with his wonderful girlfriend, and life is good, but it's also missing something. His true passion is a side gig he has as a very low-level operative for the CIA, something he wants to turn into a full-time gig. But sometimes manifesting works because there happens to be an operative shortage in France, which means that James gets paired off with Charlie Wax, a field agent played by John Travolta that is pretty much the polar opposite of James, but James isn't going to let this pass by. But before he can start this gig of a lifetime, he has to stop by customs because Charlie's refusing to relinquish his energy drinks, and it's causing a bit of an incident. James is able to smooth things over and he's able to get Charlie and the energy drinks right through customs. Charlie tells James that he's investigating a triad drug ring that's indirectly responsible for the death of the Secretary of Defense's niece. They raid a triad-controlled restaurant, and Charlie then lets him know that he's actually after terrorists. If you think taking a leap from triads to terrorists is a bit extreme, you just have to experience a little bit of Charlie's personality and it'll all seem normal. This guy is a maniac. Now you mix that with James's rookie status and slightly timid personality and things get dicey. They learn that terrorists are targeting a summit and that James's own girlfriend is involved in the plot. They fight and win and save the day, and James is actually offered a full-time partnership with Charlie. This movie is quite the ride, and these two actors have great chemistry together. Seeing Charlie's fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants plans mix with James's reserved and out-of-his-element style is really great. It's also great seeing James slowly crawl out of his shell and become the field agent he always knew he wanted to be. Now that these two have an established partnership, I would love to see the kind of trouble they'd get into. The problem is, it doesn't really have that big of a fan base, so there's not that much momentum for a sequel. Of course, it's hard to build a fan base if not a lot of people know about the movie in the first place, which is something they failed at. It's not an impossibility though, because John Travolta actually did an interview with the Star-Ledger where he said that he's not really a sequel guy and not really a fan of them, but this one that he loves. He says that he would definitely do something like From London with Love or From Prague with Love, so, fingers crossed, it might actually happen. This is a movie that needs no introduction, and it is getting a sequel, but the fact that it took almost 3 decades to get one, and that the sequel might come out after an Avatar sequel, just makes me shudder. For anyone who hasn't seen it or just needs a refresher, let me bring you into the world of Beetlejuice. Barbara and Adam Maitland are returning to their country home when they swerve to miss a dog. Of course, that sends them into the river. It's a problem. When they finally get home, they slowly start to realize that they never actually survived their river drive. After a period of time, a new and very much alive couple moves into their house, as well as their daughter. When they start to redecorate, the Maitlands realize that they gotta do something about this. Naturally, being ghosts, they figure the best thing to do is haunt the new family away. Except haunting's apparently hard, and they're really not good at it. They find their way into the underworld, and they realize that it's just full of bureaucracy and policies and procedures, and they learn that they have to remain in the house for 125 years or bad things happen. And if they want any sort of peace, they have to deal with the new family. They eventually hire a bio-exorcist named Beetlejuice, and they return to the house to haunt away the new family. Of course, the family can't see ghosts, except their goth daughter Lydia can, and this causes a bunch of problems. And then an accidental exorcism is performed against the Maitlands, which causes way more mayhem, but things work out and the two families end up being able to live together. This movie was and is incredible. It's just so bizarre, and Michael Keaton just nailed his character. It's just super well known in pop culture and holds a warm place in a lot of people's hearts. They've always wanted to do a sequel, but it never came to pass, but they are finally getting one going, and Winona Ryder and Michael Keaton are reprising their roles, and I just can't wait to see it. Now, when I first saw this movie, I thought it was a ripoff of The Mechanic and John Wick, but when I looked deeper into it, I was actually surprised. The Accident Man is a 2018 action movie starring Scott Adkins as an assassin who uses accidents to eliminate his targets. But, surprising to me, The Accident Man is the name of a short-lived comic series by Pat Mills in the early 90s. This movie is just taking from that series. This is a comic book movie. I guarantee not many people know about this comic series, but Scott Adkins is not one of them. He grew up on action movies and comic books, and he was a huge fan of this series. So much so that he thought when he grew up, if he ever became a movie star, he would make this movie and he would star in it. And here we are. The movie follows Mike Fallon, the assassin I was talking about, who finds out that his ex-girlfriend was murdered in a robbery. The problem is her death doesn't seem to add up, so he starts looking into it deeper. To make matters worse, he finds out that his ex-girlfriend was pregnant with his child, so when he goes to her current girlfriend to figure out more information, she's not really willing to talk. You can imagine there's some tension between them. When one of the assassins from the Oasis busts down Charlie's door to try and kill her, things get awkward. It turns out that his ex-girlfriend was looking into the dealings of a corrupt oil company, and when they found this out, they put a hit out on her. Of course, that naturally went to the members of the Oasis, and now that's pitted them against Mike. Things get horrible. Mike's now fighting against a very eclectic group of assassins from the Oasis Club, and just trying to figure out what's happening and keep himself alive. This movie is incredibly violent and has some great action in it. It's just super entertaining, a lot of fun, and definitely worth seeing. It seems like there is talk about a sequel, but it hasn't happened yet, and I'm just keeping my fingers crossed because I definitely need one. Monsters of Man is a 2020 movie that surprised the heck out of me when I first saw it, and I've been sucked into it ever since. Like I said earlier, I like low-budget movies, so when I saw this movie, I thought it was going to be a cheesy robot movie, and then I watched it, and I realized this was an incredibly done sci-fi movie. It's directed by Mark Toya, who's a relatively unknown director, and was done in a budget under $2 million, which for the quality of just everything in this movie is just incredible. The basic premise is the CIA has these 4 new killer robots that they just want to test out, because why wouldn't they? They decide that they're going to airdrop them into a village in Southeast Asia where they suspect heroin's being made. Just give it a test run. They've enlisted these 3 techies to help with the operation who think that they're just doing a test run. That's not the case. During the airdrop, one of the robots malfunctions, and to keep things clean, they decide to kill everyone in the village. The problem with that is there's 6 American doctors backpacking through, as well as an ex-Marine that lives there. Now they're pitted against these killer robots trying to keep themselves and the village safe. It's not a deep script, and it is very much an action movie, but it is so well done that it deserves so much more credit. The acting is great, the way it's shot is just so crisp, the action, and there is a lot of it, is done so well done, and just the way these robots move is incredibly creepy. All in all, it's a really good movie, and the fact that it's done by a relatively unknown director and a low budget is just really impressive, and I need to see more. And if you watch the movie, it kind of leaves a cliffhanger where there can very well be more, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed for it. And finally, we've got Face Off. How the heck has this movie not had a sequel yet? I think pretty much everyone has seen this movie, or at least knows the basic premise because of all the pop culture references surrounding it, but let's just recap anyway. It's a classic John Woo movie starring John Travolta and Nicolas Cage, and it is just incredible. Nicolas Cage plays Castor Troy, a bad guy whose only real goal seems to be causing as much mayhem as he can, and also toying with Sean Archer. Sean Archer is played by John Travolta, and he's the FBI agent that's been hunting Castor Troy for years. They have this cat and mouse game going on, and Castor shot his son. It's really awkward. Castor has planted a bomb in the city, and Sean Archer is out to get him and stop the bomb. Naturally, during their battle, Castor ends up in a coma and no one knows where this bomb is. With time ticking down, they decide to get radical. There's this experimental procedure where you can literally take the face off of one person and put it on the other and just switch identities. Sean Archer now looks like Castor Troy and infiltrates his group trying to figure out clues as to where this bomb is. As you can imagine, things don't go well. Castor Troy ends up waking up and becoming Sean Archer, and a whole lot of chaos ensues. This is such a 90s action movie, it is super entertaining, and the fact there hasn't been a sequel is just a crime. Now I keep seeing that they're talking about a sequel, and John Travolta and Nicolas Cage are actually involved in it, so I hope it happens, and I hope it's good. Those are the 10 movies that I think need a sequel long before Avatar, and I know there are so much more, so let me know in the comments below which movie you would like to see a sequel of. And if you like this video, hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to put out a lot more videos like this, and until then, thanks for watching.